Welcome to the first episode of our podcast, Dead on Arrival, where we will be talking about experimental programs and historic events within the military aviation realm. I'm Rylan Reese, and this is our host today, Nicholas Alfaro. And today we will be talking about two aircraft that are similar. They both are Mach 3 capable aircraft, the YF-12A Blackbird and the XB-70 Valkyrie.
The Lockheed YF-12A Blackbird was manufactured in 1963, being a high-altitude Mach 3 interceptor. Its role was to be a long-range air defense prototype to intercept Soviet bombers coming over the Arctic. It had a crew of only two, that being the pilot and the fire control officer. It was manufactured by Lockheed Skunk Works, and it was the brainchild of Teddy Johnson. Next aircraft is the XB-70.
The North American XB-70 Valkyrie was a prototype for a nuclear-capable deep-penetration supersonic aircraft for the United States Air Force's Strategic Air Command, and it was designed in the early 50s, having its maiden flight in the 1960s, and would replace concurrent bombers such as the B-52 and B-58 Hustler. The program was incredibly expensive, costing $1.5 billion, and it could exceed speeds of Mach 3, making it able to evade contemporaneous interceptor aircraft from Russia, of course, which was the enemy at the time, we all know. What made its appearance stand out in particular was its 6 engines and its wings that could bend downward. These wings that bend downward were used something called compression lift, which would basically use the shockwave from the aircraft itself and redirect it onto the aircraft, allowing the aircraft to generate lift on its own shockwave. However, the aircraft wasn't meant to last, having an accident where an F-104 starfighter in the middle of a photo shoot crashed into it in a mid-air collision. The pilot managed to eject with his arm being crushed, but his co-pilot was unfortunately killed in the accident, along with the F-104 starfighter pilot. With a lot of issues recurring in oil valves and leakages, etc., as well as even once a horizontal splitter and an intake flying in and disabling 4 of the XB-70's engines, the aircraft just kept coming across too many problems and it ended up being canceled in later years. What it did teach us is that supersonic bombers are viable, and actually ended up somewhat influencing the B-1 Lancer. And some of the reasons the XB-70 was canceled was the rise of SAM sites and nuclear missiles, such as with the rise of intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Now, how many aircraft did you say?
2 XB-70 prototypes were produced.
And there's only 3 YF-12s produced. And there was a contract signed for the F-12B, which is a production variant, and there's 93 ordered at the time. The program was canceled in 1968 because of the, again, vastly changing military doctrine. Because both of these aircraft did prove that sustaining Mach 3 is greatly feasible. However, due to the changing military doctrine again, it just deprecated them entirely because of how we shifted from high-speed interceptors to intercept the Soviet bombers and the rise of ICBMs that pushed for air defense systems. Modern day, this being the Iron Dome being used in many countries. But the YF-12 had a not very vast armament, but it did have an armament consisting of the AIM-47, which influenced the AIM-54 Phoenix, which was used on the F-14 Tomcat. But I mentioned how the YF-12 was deprecated due to the doctrine at the time, but how was the XB-70? Was it deprecated for the same reasons, that being the rise of SAMs and intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs? Or was it cost due to the Vietnam War?
The XB-70, mainly it was just shifting doctrine in general. Same thing as the SAMs and intercontinental ballistic missiles, that just kind of made it useless. The idea of having like a supersonic bomber when you could have a missile that could travel like to Russia or like Moscow in like 30 minutes and drop a nuclear payload whilst you need to station or maintain a bomber, and it might take like an hour to fly to Moscow. It intercontinental ballistic missiles seemed like an easier and expendable option compared to strategic bombers at the time.
Was the XB-70 used for anything other than just being a paper design? Because the YF-12 was used by NASA, and it proved Mach 3 capable research, but was it ever used in experiments or
The testing itself for the XB-70 was, in a sense, Mach 3 research, but there was a proposed RB-70 or like XR-70, which would end up being a reconnaissance version of the XB-70. However, it didn't really end up being developed much other than just a proposed idea.
Yes, I would say in the end, all these 2 aircraft, the legendary for what they proved and what they did, but, also just remembered for what they could have been.
Thank you for listening on today's podcast on America's Mach 3 Titans, the XB-70 Valkyrie, and the YF-12A.
Our next episode, Canceled Legends, will feature the AH-56 Cheyenne and YF-23.
We hope you enjoy our podcast.